Today, we're looking at 3 incredible dive watches from my own personal collection, and they're all under $5,000. My name is Blake Bettner. You've heard me talk about all 3 of these watches quite a bit over the last couple of years. All 3 of these watches are relatively new, releasing within the past 3 years, starting with the Sinn U50, which was released back in 2020. I was immediately enamored with this watch for how it pulled in the design language of the U1 into a way more approachable case. I've been enamored with it ever since, and it's a watch that gets a lot of wrist time to this day. After that, we have the excellent Seiko SPB149, a watch we've talked quite a bit about here on Worn and Wound, and a number of us on the editorial team count ourselves as owners of this watch. I've had the SPB149 now for coming up on 2 years, and it's a watch that also gets quite a bit of wrist time, and it's also the most playful when it comes to straps. You can tell I have a thing for Velcro straps, as 2 of these watches are currently fitted with them. And most recently added to the collection was this Tudor FXD. This is a Pelagos watch that has a few unique features that I really love. I touched upon quite a bit in my review a few years ago. All 3 of these watches have remained in my collection, and all 3 still get quite a bit of wrist time. I found they each have their own distinct personalities, even though they are all, of course, dive watches. All right, so all 3 of these watches are under $5,000, starting with the Seiko SPB149. This is a little over $1,000 and continues to trade in that range to this day. This is a limited edition to celebrate an anniversary. This has the black bezel and a deep blue dial that work together really beautifully. This has that kind of classic skin diver shape to the case that I really enjoy. And as I mentioned, it takes a lot of different straps very well. I find it sits differently enough from the Sinn and the Tudor and from a lot of other dive watches, frankly, for that kind of trademark Seiko dive watch style. This is, of course, riffing on the 62 Mas, although it's not like a direct copy of that watch. They've done that in better ways in other watches. There's something very simple about this, though, that captures a lot of the charm that a lot of us really enjoy about Seiko divers, outside of the cushion cases, of course. I love this for its case. It wears pretty tidy, if a little tanky on the wrist. It sits up a little tall, but overall, I think this is a watch that has a ton of character to it, and it's one that's just really easy to grab and go with on the day in and day out. It's probably the most approachable in terms of design from these 3 watches. There's nothing unusual about the hour markers or the hands going on. It's all just pretty straightforward dive watch. Now, moving up a bit, the Sinn U50 trades around $2,500 in that realm, so it's a bit of a step up. This, of course, uses their tegimented steel, which has a beautiful finish to it that's kind of a bead blasted, real fine texture detail here, and the color of it is much darker than regular steel. It almost comes off as titanium. It reads as titanium, but the design here is much more distinct compared to the Seiko. It's almost a brutalist quality here to this dial with the blocky hour markers and then these huge tower-like hands, which I really love. And to me, the one to have here is with the steel bezel here. They have an SDR version that has a black bezel, but there's something about how they put these numbers in here and put the colors into the slots of the bezel when it's the same color as the case here. Of course, the hits of red go a long way, and how they've incorporated the date window here in a manner that kind of disappears from the rest of the design, I really enjoy. This is kind of classic modern Sinn design language at its best. Of course, the case itself wears completely beautifully. They call it 41 millimeters, but at the case it really measures 40 millimeters. And with the crown tucked into the 4 o'clock position here, it just wears absolutely beautifully on the wrist. I'm generally not a huge fan of Sinn bracelets, but this H-link design goes pretty well with the U50, and again, it kind of carries over that texture and that color that I really love. But this is also a watch that goes great with all manner of other straps. I've usually got a NATO on here or some of these Velcro style straps that I've got laying around, and it takes them all really well. Overall, I think this is a watch that has stood up in my time with it. It hasn't really faded at all in terms of my thoughts on it. I know I was really excited about this watch when I first reviewed it, coming up on 3 years ago. I'll leave a link to that down below. You can check it out. No surprises there. It's still a banger in its original form, but just like this, I think it works just fine. And finally, moving on to the newest watch of the bunch, the Tudor FXD. So this watch has the Tudor OEM hook and loop strap here. That's because this watch has a fixed lug design. This is something that makes this watch kind of unique. It also kind of messes with the numbers of this watch a little bit. So this is one of those watches, kind of like the Speedmaster, where you see some of the measurements and it looks a little scary, but then you put it on your wrist and it wears completely differently from a lot of watches in this size range. Now the lug to lug is taken from these kind of the middle of these bowed out lug bars here. So it measures like over 50 millimeters, but effectively it's really not that tall in lug to lug. It's quite slim, under 13 millimeters, and at the case, it's just a little over 41 millimeters, I think. So it wears like really beautifully, but this is a watch that's just really not about numbers. There's a lot of really interesting details here, starting with the bezel, which is fully indexed almost, and it's bi-directional, unlike a lot of dive watches. And that's because this watch was made for members of the Marine Nationale. This is the French Navy, who do these underwater maneuvers and how they navigate in kind of shallow depths through dead reckoning. So they can move this to the minute hand, move a certain direction, adjust it to their next stop, and then move the other direction. So it's bi-directional for that reason, and it's fully indexed for that reason as well. Now there's no date here, which I really appreciate about this watch. It's a symmetrical dial, and then these lume blocks are just fabulous when they catch any kind of sunlight. So there's a lot of just kind of quirky, funky details about this watch, including the navigation features that it was developed for this Marine Nationale. I love stories like that, and ironically, that's a very niche thing, but it works really well just in kind of like everyday life because of the features that they built into it for this group of divers, which is usually kind of the opposite with how it works with divers. You know, I think it adds to the overall kind of funky charm to all of these watches, particularly between the Sinn U50 and the Tudor FXD. These are watches that are quite similar in my opinion, mainly because of their blocky hour hands and slightly unusual bezel designs and features. Overall, all three of these watches have held up incredibly well in my time with them. They've all stuck around in my collection, and they're all three watches that get quite a lot of wrist time. I haven't dove in any of these watches, but I have gone swimming in all of them, jumped off some docks, some boats and stuff like that. They all hold up just fine in the water, as you'd expect, just like a lot of the watches that we wear nowadays. But these are super fun divers to actually put to use every single day. I found that they stretch pretty far in terms of like what you can pair them with in your wardrobe. And all three watches that I don't see going anywhere anytime soon in my collection. These are my core divers that I wear most often from any of the watches in my collection. The Pelagos 39 is coming up there, making a run for it, but these three have kind of proved to be core staples that I go back to more often than not from any other watches in my collection, insofar as it comes to dive watches. I'd love to know what you think about these watches, though. Is there too much redundancy here? I feel like they each have their own personalities enough that it makes sense to have all three of them in the collection. I wear them all for different reasons, and I kind of love them all for different reasons. Let us know what you think down in the comments below. Which one you be sticking with? Any of them? None of them? All of them? Something totally different? We'd love to hear it down below. This has been kind of an inside look at my collection and why I've stuck with these three divers, all three of which we've reviewed on Worn and Wound. We'll leave links to all three of those down below. If you enjoy this content and you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. You can hit that bell to make sure you're staying up to date with all of our latest content. And if you enjoyed this video, please like and share. We appreciate you tuning in, and until next time, take care.